On July 14, 2024, the slide known as the River Rapids at Bridal Falls Waterpark was operating normally. At around 2:45 p.m., a rider reported to first aid with a significant foot laceration after riding the slide. The slide continued to operate, and around 3:40 p.m., another rider reported to first aid after reporting that their foot became stuck in a crack on the slide. The slide continued to operate, and around 3:45 p.m., a third rider exited the slide with a very large laceration on their leg that required outside medical treatment. The slide was finally closed, and a large fiberglass crack was noticed on a lower section of the slide. The investigation into the injuries began. The investigation would be handled by Technical Safety British Columbia and would focus on all aspects of the ride and the incident. This included looking for what had caused the injuries, why this problem had not been noticed, and why the ride continued to operate after a rider was injured. They first examined the slide to find the cause of the injuries. The slide itself was built into a hillside that consisted of several flat rapid sections connected by steep, sloped sliding sections. Riders would float through the turbulent rapid sections before splashing down the sliding sections. Near the bottom of the slide, on the last section where the ride switched from a sliding section to a rapid section, a large sharp crack was clearly noticeable, bulging up from the rest of the fiberglass slide. Fiberglass, as its name suggests, is much like regular glass in many ways. This includes how sharp it can be when broken. This singular crack was determined to have caused all three injuries on the slide. The investigation now turned to how this crack had been formed. To understand this, the team first looked at how the slide was designed. The slide was quite old and came from the early era of waterslide design. The slide was made in 1983 and consisted of several fiberglass sections with flat bottoms mounted inside a natural hill. The design of the slide obscured the underside of the flume from regular view as it was buried inside the hill itself. The manufacture of the slide was not known by anyone currently employed at the park, and there were no records from its construction. With no documentation from the slide's manufacturer, the investigators would fill in gaps regarding how the ride should have been built and maintained with information from modern waterslide manufacturers. The slide featured a large flat middle section. To support such a large flat area, the slide's original designers had laid the fiberglass over top a wooden core on both sides. This was common practice at the time on many water slides with such large flat areas. The investigators cut open the cracked area and were able to discover that the wooden core on the slide was completely gone. It had rotted away over several decades of water slowly leaking into it from the slide. This degradation was compounded by the slide featuring large amounts of water in this area during normal operation, rather than just the small stream like what would be found on most modern water slides. This had caused the fiberglass surface where the crack had occurred to bubble up prior to the crack becoming a hazard. In fact, several other areas on the slide featured large bubbling areas of fiberglass. When these were cut open, it was found that the wood core had completely rotted away in these areas too. In addition to this, the investigators looked under the slide segments. The slide featured no support structure and relied entirely on support from the ground it was built into. Under the section of the flume that had failed, investigators found a large void where dirt and gravel underneath the slide had been washed away over time, leaving a significant gap between the already weakened fiberglass and the supporting ground. In this void, the investigators found a large amount of spray foam that had been placed there in an attempt to stabilize the slide at some point in the past. However, it was noticed that the spray foam was only supporting part of the flume. The area where the crack had occurred was not being supported at all. With the design of the slide understood, the investigators turned to the maintenance and operation of the slide. The water park operated seasonally and would use the off-season to perform major slide overhauls and repairs with the use of an outside contractor who had experience working for a major waterslide manufacturer in the past. The contractor would inspect all the slides at the park over each off-season and make repair recommendations to the park's general manager. If the general manager approved of the cost of the repair, the contractor would complete the work. The contractor would do all different kinds of work, from structural repairs to gel coat replacement and more. The park's general manager and the contractor stated that repairs that were needed for the safe operation of any slide were always completed at the park. though the contractor did state that some minor, non-safety critical repairs had been skipped in the past. The records of maintenance work performed by the contractor showed that the River Rapids slide had last received significant work about 3 years prior to the accident. For in-season repairs and inspections, the park's general manager and immediate staff were responsible. The park also employed a team of seasonal leads that would be in charge of walking each slide prior to park opening and making note of any issues they discovered. These staff were trained in the preseason each year, and the park's employment record showed that turnover was rather low. This meant that most leads had multiple years of experience on the slides of the park and should be qualified to perform the inspections. The inspectors shadowed a lead as they performed an inspection of the slides at the park, and found that the lead was very thorough and found all of the same problems that the inspectors would have. The leads interviewed stated that minor cracks in the slides were somewhat common, and as long as they could run their finger over them without feeling any sharp edges or them getting caught, it was not something to be overly concerned about. This guidance is consistent with industry best practices, as often on slides there are minor defects in the fiberglass or the gel coat that may look like a concern, but are actually very minor problems. It's considered best practice to not address many of these gel coat issues until they become more significant due to how frequently they occur on all slides. The lead inspection from the morning of the accident did not show anything out of the ordinary on the River Rapids slide, only a minor crack in a pool upstream of the accident location. What was noticed by both the leads and the general manager many times before the accident, though, was the presence of bowed-out sections of fiberglass along the slide path on the River Rapids slide. These sections would often flex when stood on, and they were considered by the staff at the park to be an intentional part of the slide's design, as no one at the park was aware of how the slide was built or intended to be operated. They had no context as to what these bulges or bubbles were, so they believed them to be designed to control the speed and motion of tubes. The bubbles and bulges were actually telltale signs that the slide's core had rotted away and that the fiberglass underneath was beginning to delaminate, ultimately leading to this accident. Problems like this on older slides are not that uncommon. Industry-leading slide restoration firm Safe Slide does extensive work refurbishing and refreshing old water slides. They offer specific services to replace the old wooden cores on slides designed like this and repair fiberglass that has started to delaminate. If the slide's owners were aware of how the slide was designed or of what its nominal condition was when it was first installed, it's likely that this accident could have been avoided. Finally, they turned to the slide's operation. Why were more riders allowed to go down the slide after someone had already gotten injured? The water park operated with slide attendants placed at each slide in the park. The River Rapids used multiple attendants, as each attendant was responsible for watching a section of the ride and ensuring that tubes did not get too bunched up. A lead was in charge of the entire daily operation and would ensure proper staffing levels, proper operation, and attendant breaks. Above the lead, the park's general manager would be on call if anything else was needed. When the first injury occurred on the River Rapids slide at around 2:45 p.m., the injured rider was taken directly to first aid. No attempt was made to determine where the rider was injured. It's not uncommon for minor scrapes and cuts to happen at a water park. Accordingly, the staff may have at first written off this injury as insignificant. By 3 p.m., it was clear that this was not a minor injury and an ambulance was called for the injured rider. The park's general manager was still not informed of the injury, but the park staff was now aware that the injury occurred on the River Rapids slide. At 3:30 p.m., a water park guest informed the general manager that they thought something was wrong with the tube slide. The general manager and a lead in training went out to investigate. After getting to the slide, the general manager noticed what appeared to be a crack in the slide. As the crack was underwater and partially obscured by the flowing water, the general manager made the decision to close the entrance of the slide, but to still allow riders already on the slide and in the queue line to ride. The general manager instructed the attendant closest to the crack to try and push riders around the crack. Sometime within the next 15 minutes, a second rider has their foot get caught in the crack and exits the runout pool with a minor injury. At around 3:45, as the last riders were going down the slide, An 11-year-old rider went down the slide and went directly over the crack. This rider would experience a traumatic leg injury. At this point, the slide was finally shut down. It took an entire hour between the first signs of a problem being noticed to when the slide was actually shut down. This was largely due to the lack of communication between the frontline staff and the leadership about what was occurring. In addition, when the general manager made the call to close the line but keep operating the slide, no one was sent down into the area of the crack to determine its actual severity, despite walking the slide path being a normal part of the slide's operation. From the outside, the full extent of the crack was not obvious, and so this likely contributed to the manager's decision to continue operation. With all of this information uncovered, we can reconstruct the accident. On July 14, 2024, the River Rapids tube slide at Bridal Falls Waterpark was operating normally, or at least as normally as this slide was capable of operating. The slide was in a deteriorated state after sitting in the ground for over 40 years. The support under many sections of the slide had washed away. In addition, the wooden core added to increase the stability of the flat sections inside the fiberglass had long since rotted away, leaving bulges in the fiberglass surface where the material started to delaminate. At around 2:45 p.m., a rider was completing the final section of the slide when they felt their foot get caught on something. They exited the runout pool with a large and deep laceration in their foot. They were quickly taken to Park First Aid and eventually taken for further treatment. Meanwhile, the slide continued operation, with riders making their way over and around the section of broken and sharp fiberglass pointed directly upstream near the bottom of the slide. At around 3:30 p.m., the park's general manager is informed of a problem on the slide, and after looking at the issue, decides to close access to new riders, but to continue to allow riders in the line and on the slide to traverse the flume, instructing the attendant closest to the crack to push riders around it. At around 3:40 p.m., a rider exits the slide complaining of a sprained ankle and minor cuts due to being caught in the crack. The slide continued to operate. At around 3:45 p.m., an 11-year-old rider near the end of the line is making their way down the slide. The attendant near the bottom attempts to push them away from the crack area, but due to the unpredictable forces on the slide, the rider passes directly over the sharp crack. The rider exits the runout pool with a large and life-altering laceration on their leg. The slide was finally closed, but the investigation did not begin. The park did not inform the provincial government of the incident. It was only a few days later that a concerned park visitor contacted the government and that the investigation into the accident actually began. Technical Safety British Columbia would end up issuing a number of recommendations to all owners of fiberglass water slides as a result of the investigation. Their first was to detail in their training the importance of looking for signs of bulging, change of shape, and movement on a water slide's flume surface. These are all signs of a fiberglass delamination event, and they were simply looked at as normal on this slide prior to the accident. Their second recommendation was to have all slides with wood cores or obscured supports be inspected at least once annually for signs of eroded supports or degrading cores. This is recommended to be done by the slide's manufacturer or a qualified slide restoration firm. Their final recommendation to owners of all slides was to immediately stop operation whenever a potentially unsafe condition with a slide is suspected. 2 additional people were injured in this incident due to the slide continuing operation after the crack was discovered. The failure of the park staff to inspect the crack up close to determine its actual severity contributed to this decision. The park itself continues to operate, now with these recommendations in place, though with the River Rapids slide closed. According to the park's website, the slide is currently undergoing a major refurbishment, and it's expected that it will open in 2026. The waterslide industry experienced explosive growth in the 1980s. Suddenly, hundreds of different manufacturers started to pop up, creating their own take on what a waterslide should be. The following decades would be marked by consolidation as big players purchased smaller ones, and in that time, the people who designed many of these early slides retired from the industry. As the industry was so new at the time, many areas, including where this slide was located, did not require manufacturers to provide any documentation for their slides. This would eventually change, but by that time it was too late. Accordingly, some slides from this era were left in a limbo state, with their current owners and operators unaware of how the slides were designed and what their condition was supposed to be like. These conditions all came together on July 14, 2024, resulting in this accident. It's for these reasons, along with the park's slow response to the developing crisis, that I feel that this story from a very small water park is worth taking lessons from for the rest of the industry. Had the slide's nominal operation condition been better understood, this accident could have been avoided altogether. Additionally, had the park's management team communicated better during the crisis and been more prepared, 2 additional riders would not have been injured. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it interesting or at least learned something. As always, links to the accident report are in the video description if you'd like to learn more. Additionally, I have all the accident reports I've obtained over the years listed on my website, free for anyone to read or download at any time. As always, thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.